All right, everyone. So this is Chapter 4, Part 2, PowerPoint, starting at slide 31. So far we've done the connective tissues. We've done all of the connective tissue propers. This is going to pick up with connective tissue fluid. So there are two fluid connective tissues, blood and lymph. For blood, our ground substance is a watery substance called plasma, which has cells and cell fragments. Now, instead of actual fibers, we kind of cheat with the blood, and we say that the formed elements take the place of the fibers. And the formed elements means cells. So we have red blood cells known as erythrocytes, white blood cells known as leukocytes, and platelets, which you'll learn in Anatomy 2, are known as thrombocytes. So they kind of count as the fibers, and the plasma is the ground substance, and that will be the matrix. So here are some examples of those cells. You do not have to know the individual types of white cells at this point. We will learn them later on in Anatomy 2. So just know the erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets as your three categories. Lymph actually is a system that's an incomplete circulatory system. It picks up fluid that is shoved out of the capillary walls by the regular cardiovascular system and picks it up and then takes it through the lymphatic system and then delivers it back to the blood. So this basically plasma that's been kind of shoved out, and it gets examined and cleaned and filtered, and then it gets put back into the blood. Okay, again, we won't get to touch too much on the lymphatic system in this course at all, but I do want to mention it here because that's one of the liquid or fluid connective tissues. Okay, the last category of connective tissue is connective tissue supportive or supporting. So there are two basic kinds. There's cartilage and bone. Cartilage is not 100% solid. It's a semi-solid gel. It's a firm gel. And it has chondroitin sulfates, which are polysaccharide derivatives. I know it sounds like blah, 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 blah to you. That means there's lots of proteins and sugars mixed together, okay? The cells in all of the cartilages are called chondrocytes. That prefix chondro means cartilage. And because the matrix is almost a solid, is a firm gel, the cell can't live in a gel. It has to live in a hole in the gel. And so the hole is called a lacuna. If you have a more than one, then you put an E on the end of that word and turn it into lacunae. Now, I love looking at cartilage because the lacuna with the little chondrocytes inside kind of look like googly eyes. So it's the only tissue that looks back at you. Now, cartilage is avascular, means it has no blood vessels in it, so all oxygen and nutrients have to diffuse to the cells in the lacuna through the firm gel matrix. It does have a connective tissue covering called the perichondrium that has an outer tough fibrous layer and an inner cellular layer, and that is where you're going to find the blood vessels to supply oxygen and nutrients to the cells. There are three kinds of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the one you're going to find in most of your body. It is tough but flexible, and its main job is to keep your joints frictionless. It's smooth and glossy and glassy. It attracts a lot of water into the matrix. So we're going to put it in places where two bones have to meet, like synovial joints, on the fronts of your ribs, around your sternum, and in your trachea. Looks like googly eyes with nothing else around them if you look at them on the slide. The second kind is elastic cartilage. It's a bit more rare. It's only found on your outer ear and epiglottis. The epiglottis is the flap that goes back and forth and covers your trachea when you're swallowing food and covers your esophagus when you are breathing. And if you look at elastic cartilage, the slide kind of looks like our googly eyes are in a stained glass window with a thick, dark border. That's the elastic fibers that are inside elastic cartilage. The last kind of cartilage is called fibrocartilage, and it's very, very tough. In fact, it is the second strongest tissue in your body, only second to bone. Bone is hard as steel. It has better twisting resistance forces than steel. It's like concrete. Fibrocartilage is second strongest. So you're going to put it in places that are really going to have a lot of force applied, and you would like to have solid bone, but you can't. You need to have something squishy. So places you would have it. You would have it between your pubic bones in the front. You would have it between your vertebrae, and in certain joints, like your knee, you have a big thick pad of fibrocartilage called the meniscus. The meniscus of the knee is made of fibrocartilage. Now, when you look at fibrocartilage under the microscope, it looks like your googly eyes are lined up like peas in a pod. They're going to be in straight rows, kind of almost connected to each other. So here are our images. So hyaline cartilage here is here at the top. So here are our googly eyes. Remember, on the test, we might ask you what the space or hole is called. That is the lacuna. E if it's more than one, A alone if it's one. The cell, if we say what is the cell type, it is a chondrocyte. For all of the cartilages, the cell type is the same. So this is what hyaline cartilage looks like. You don't really see any fibers in the background. This is what elastic cartilage looks like. Now they start to look like they're in a stained glass window because we have so many fibers in there. Okay, now the two of these look different from these, which are our fibrocartilage, which kind of line up in straight rows like peas in a pea pod. And you can see the fibers in fibrocartilage here in this diagram. The one we gave you for lab, you don't see the fibers as well, but you do see the pea pods very clearly. And all three of these will be on the first lab exam. And of course, they're in this lecture talk because they're also on the lecture test. Okay, how does cartilage grow? Well, the little cells are in these lacuna. It can grow from two different ways. It can grow from inside the middle. So a chondrocyte in a lacuna undergoes mitosis and divides, and then it begins secreting matrix between the two cells, which spreads them out. That means the cartilage is growing from the center out. That is called interstitial growth. Or just under the perichondrium, we can have chondroblasts that will begin to deposit more cartilage matrix right under the perichondrium. And so it's at the outer edges, and that is called appositional growth. And so here are those types of growth. Interstitial growth would be from within by mitosis, and appositional growth would be by chondroblasts that are secreting matrix just under the perichondrium. Okay, the last of the connective tissues is the connective tissue supportive known as bone. It's also known as osseous tissue, and its job is to support your weight. Now, it has the strongest and the only solid matrix because our organic collagen fibers are going to combine with inorganic salts, and so it becomes calcified. It's able to resist shattering because of the collagen fibers. The prefix for bone is going to be osteo, and so the cells that are going to live in the bone are going to be called osteocytes. The ones that build the matrix of bone will be osteoblasts, and the ones that tear down will be osteoclasts. Now, just like in the cartilage, these cells are living in a very tough matrix. And so they have to live in a hole in the matrix known as a lacuna, and plural is lacunae or lacunae. Now we have an additional problem though, because we can't diffuse oxygen and nutrients through the calcified salts. So instead we need tiny little canals or passageways from where a blood vessel is, which is a hole called the central canal, out to where the cell's lacunae are, and those little tiny channels are called canaliculi. Okay? Canaliculi. Around the outside of the bone, we're going to have a periosteum, kind of like our perichondrium. Peri means around, osteum means bone. It'll have a fibrous layer on the outside, and it'll have a cellular layer on the inside that helps work on the bone. So this is what's called compact bone. You also have spongy bone, but this is compact bone. And so here is a central canal that has an artery and a vein in it. This hole is the central canal. And then these little, seed shapes are the lacunae. Notice they are laid down in layers around the central canal. And then eventually we can't put any more because the oxygen and nutrients passing through these little cracks called the canaliculi isn't enough to support more than a few layers of bone. And then we have to put another one. Now these are called osteons, and we're going to learn more about them in the bone unit, which is coming up. But this is what it looks like under a photomicrograph. What a photomicrograph looks like. Here's my central canal, And then we have the osteocyte, which would be the cell that would live in the lacunae. So that is bone tissue. Now, we've talked about all of the epithelial tissues and the connective tissues, but we have some areas in the body where we put them together. Those are called tissue membranes. They are physical barriers in our bodies. They line or cover the surfaces, and they are always an epithelium combined with a connective tissue. So we have 4 types of tissue membranes: mucous membranes, serous membranes, cutaneous membranes, and synovial membranes. Mucous membranes are going to have an outlet to outside of the body, but they are always to be kept wet. So any part of your body that has a way to go to the outside but is wet all the time is going to be lined with a mucous membrane. So your eyes, your nasal passages, your mouth, right? All of those, your anus, your urethra, they're all going to have outlets to the outside, but the tissue itself has to be kept wet. They must be wet to reduce friction, to help with absorption or secretion. And the areolar tissue that we're going to use in them is going to be called the lamina propria. So the connective tissue combined with the epithelium is going to be called the lamina propria. So here is a layer of simple columnar epithelium. Here's our goblet cell. And then the lamina propria, the areolar tissue just underneath. This is the makeup of a mucous membrane. The goblet cell produces the mucus. So we have a simple columnar with a connective tissue lamina propria. Now we have a tissue membrane. For a serous membrane, it is a wet membrane that it's never exposed to the outside body. Okay? So these are the cavities we talked about in the first chapter. So we had like your ventral cavity, thoracic cavity, mediastinum, pleural cavity, pericardial cavity, and peritoneal cavity. They are going to be lined with a serous membrane. And remember, those membranes were pleural, visceral pleura, parietal pleura for the lung, right? The visceral pericardium and parietal pericardium for the pericardial cavity, and the visceral peritoneum and parietal peritoneum for the abdominal cavity. And there's the descriptions of those. And to make the serous membrane, we have a layer of serous fluid. We have a simple squamous mesothelium, and we have a thicker areolar connective tissue layer. Now, these are still very thin membranes, very delicate, but they are enough to seal off the different cavities inside the body. Cutaneous membrane is a dry membrane that faces the outside all the time. So basically, your cutaneous membrane is your skin. Thick, relatively waterproof, and usually kept dry. Synovial membranes are going to go around synovial joints and lock in a joint fluid that helps lubricate